Let's get to the pigskin. NFL, the Cincinnati Bengals. Boy, they took care of their wide receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Jamar Chase got a 4-year, $161 million contract. Champ, he's now the highest non-quarterback in the NFL. It was Myles Garrett for a little bit, but now it's Jamar Chase. I'm reading it here from an article from Sports Illustrated's Andy Nesbitt. Jamar Chase's 4-year, $160 million contract has $73.9 million fully guaranteed at signing, which is $41.17 million in base salary, a roster bonus, and per game roster bonuses for 2025, and a $32.73 million in base salary and a roster bonus for 2026. His 2-year total is $75 million, with another $1.1 million in per game roster bonuses for 2026, not fully guaranteed until next March. And then T. Higgins, 4-year, $115 million contract, $30 million fully guaranteed at signing, a $20 million roster bonus this March, and a $10 million roster bonus next March. Interestingly, his $13.8 million base for this year is not yet guaranteed. So I'm happy for the wide receivers getting paid because, Champ, you've made the argument. If the Cincinnati Bengals lose both their targets, if you're Joe Burrow, I do everything I can to get up out of here in Cincinnati. But here's the thing, Champ, and I'm happy that they got their money. And I love Joe Burrow, but you've been an advocate. I'm telling you right now, even though Champ's wearing the suit and the cap, but make no mistake about it, outside, he'd probably be wearing a suit and tie and be in court for them offensive linemen. Quarterback cannot throw behind his back. Offensive lineman, if you need somebody to advocate for you, look no further than Champ Pryor from Columbus, Georgia. Just give him a call and he'll represent you on your behalf. Trust me, you need someone as articulate and as knowledgeable as Champ Pryor. I mean, he may deny it all he wants, but Champ Pryor will speak for the big fellas. Champ, you've been on the record saying quarterback cannot throw behind his back. Yes, I'm glad for Joe Burrow. They took care of their weapons. But in the end, how's this going to help out Cincinnati? Because you look at Pittsburgh, they're not going to, whether Aaron Rodgers met with the team, I don't know. And if I'm Cam Hayward, Hayward, I agree with everything he said. I ain't no interested in darkness retreat. Either you're going to be a part of the Pittsburgh Steelers or not. Now, Cleveland, well, that's a story for another day. We won't get into that. And then when you look at Baltimore, they're still the team in the AFC North, in my opinion. Champ, although they took care of their wide receivers, Cincinnati still has a lot of needs they have to address. And plus, Trey Hendrickson. So he may sit out for the 2025 season if he doesn't get his money. And Mike Brown, well known for being cheap. I mean, go look at the stories of TJ Hushmanzada. Go look at all the stories of all. I mean, he's cheap. I mean, he's so cheap he makes government cheese look affordable. That's how Mike Tomlin is. But Champ, I'm gonna let you go. What were your thoughts about the contract extensions?
Look, I'm gonna give credit where credit is due. Number one, he did re-sign him, but there's a but on there. T. Higgins' contract, rumor has it, is a year-to-year guarantee, and it's no cap hit from year to year. So yeah, I mean, although he got him on the wash, but he retrieved it on the rent. So his contract is really year to year. So that's what rumor has. But I applaud them for keeping that offense together. I mean, it's kind of like what it's kind of like what they did before with TJ Hushmanzada and Chad Johnson. And they kept Chris Henry, God rest his soul, together. And what the Indianapolis Colts did with Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne, they kept them together for a certain amount of time. But there's a but on there. There's a but on there. You still have not got that O-line together. Come on now. Y'all ain't figured it out yet? Y'all ain't figured it out. The first thing that Chicago did is when it got Joe Tooney. That's the first thing they did. So, number one, you're missing offensive lineman. Number two, you're about to lose your best pass rusher on a very lackluster defense as it is. So once you lose him, because you can rest believe, a team is licking their chops right about now, seeing how they can get him. Don't be surprised if Ted, I be want to call him Ted Hendrickson so bad. Don't be surprised if Hendricks ends up going to the Philadelphia Eagles. Don't be surprised.
Or the Commanders.
Or the Commanders. Don't be surprised if he goes to either one of those teams, because the Eagles just lost Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. So don't be surprised if that happens. But I digress. And you have to address your defense. I can understand keeping offense together, but there's been too many times throughout NFL history we've seen these very, very high-powered offense, and they don't necessarily succeed. We saw Air Coryell. Need I say more? We saw people want to talk about Air Coryell, the Don Coryell offense. They talk about seeing it in San Diego. We also saw it in St. Louis when they were the Cardinals with O.J. Anderson. So we saw that iteration of it twice. Then we seen the New Orleans Saints, although they won that one Super Bowl, but they had a lot of years where they was top in rushing yards, top in passing yards, top in completion percentage. But it was pretty much empty stats at a certain point because they had no defense. And if you need any more evidence, look at what happened with Matt Ryan after the Super Bowl appearance. Our defense went down and down and down. And guess what? You didn't have anything to match that high-powered offense that we still had left with Julio, with Calvin Ridley, with some of the other players that we had, Austin Hooper. So it's scary what they're going to do on offense, but as you know, you can't outgun everybody every day. There's going to be some games, especially during bad weather games, where your offense can't draw mud. It happens. And you're going to be in some close games with defenses. You're not going to be able to just spread it around through the air. You're going to have to depend on your defense. And when that happens, you're going to lose a hell of a lot of games that you're supposed to win. That's what happens. Right now, your best pass rusher, he wants out. I'll go back to the Air Coryell team. We saw this happen with them. It's just history repeating itself. I never forget. I think it was 1981. Fred Dean, Hall of Famer. He was part of that San Diego Chargers defense, and he was their best defensive player. He was their best defensive player. They didn't want to pay him. Now, the Air Coryell offense, they had offense galore. They had John Jefferson. They had Wes Chandler. They had Charlie Joyner. They had Kellen Winslow Senior, excuse me. Not to mention, to add insult to injury, they had Chuck Muncie, who's a very underrated running back. Matter of fact, led the league in rushing in 1981. But without Fred Dean, they lost a lot of games that they were supposed to win simply because they didn't have the defense. And do you know what happened in that same year? Fred Dean got traded in the middle of the season. Where did he go? To the San Francisco 49ers and won them a Super Bowl. Now he's in the Hall of Fame. I can see something like that happening with Trey Hendrickson, leaving Cincinnati, high-powered offense, then going straight up there to Philadelphia. Or since they missed out on getting the other Bosa brother, or even the San Francisco 49ers themselves, and being able to get being able to get them into a hump. So I like the signings. It goes to prove to the front office. It goes to prove to the rank and file. It goes to prove to the players that we're here to win. I like the signing. But the thing is, what are you going to do about your defense? We've seen very few teams win Super Bowls when your team is at the bottom of the league in offense. Hell, even the greatest show on turf, they had a great pass rusher on their team by the name of Kevin Carter, and they had London Fletcher. They had key defensive players that can make plays. San Francisco as well. So when you talk about these great offenses, we've seen way too many times where, hey, you may have a great offense, but the defense is lackluster, and so you're not going to get very far. Like I said, prime example of that in recent memory would be the New Orleans Saints. They won that Super Bowl in 2010, and if you ask me, they could have won more. And like I said, as a Falcons fan, I hate to say that, but you got to give credit where credit is due. They could have won more had they had a defense. And even the year they won the Super Bowl, their defense was at the bottom of the league. So they have to address some things on that defensive side of the ball. They should do nothing less than address that defense. You have to address that defense, and you have to address that offensive line. Because as John McKay said, the late, great John McKay from USC, battles are won and lost in the trenches. If you ain't got the offensive line and the defensive line in order to do that, you're going to lose a hell of a lot of games, but you're supposed to win. And guess what? I love the signing. I'm glad those young men were able to get their money, and you're keeping this core together. But again, what about that defense? What about that O-line? What about the running game? We already seen, well, I think his name was Chase Brown. Chase Brown rushed for over 900 yards, but he had injuries going down the stretch. Are you going to bring him back? You got to address a lot of things. And just because you have the biggest names that are signed doesn't mean your work is done. Because we've seen big names get signed by you before. We saw you sign Carson Palmer, TJ Houshmandzadeh, and Chad Johnson. Then right behind that, on top of that, you get a good running back from the Chicago Bears by the name of the late, great Cedric Benson. You had all of that, but you lost a lot of games that you should have won because you didn't have the defense. So I'm still worried about the Cincinnati Bengals, although you signed those guys. Because although the core is there, you have no defense, and the O-line is still, and you get off the slow starts at the beginning of the season. So what's going to happen? You get off to another slow start at the beginning of the season. You're going to have all of this offense, no defense, and now you're finna get 40 put up on you by a team like the Oakland Raiders who ain't got no business scoring a point. You have to win the games you're supposed to win, and without a good defense, you're not going to win. Without at least a decent defense, you're not going to win.
If you look at the Cincinnati Bengals defensively, I'm reading it now from Pro Football Reference. They were 21st in the NFL in passing defense. They were also 19th in rushing defense, scoring defense 25th, and in team defense, they were 25th in the NFL. BRF, what are your thoughts about the signings of both T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase?
From an offensive standpoint, I definitely do like the signings because they needed to keep that offensive core together, and that offensive core should be able to make a statement for years to come. The problem is you got all this money tied up in the offense, and understandably so, but now what do you do as far as the offense? Because I feel like Trey Hendrickson is as good as gone, because what money do you have left to give to him? So I think he's good as gone, and like y'all were talking, y'all brought up the Philadelphia Eagles, you brought up the Washington Commanders. Those are two really good fits for him in terms of how their coaching staff like to operate, as far as like how they like to call their play, how they like to call their defenses schematically. Dan Quinn being in Washington, being a very, very he's predicated as far as his pass rush, as far as getting to the quarterback. And Trey Hendrickson would be a perfect guy that he could build that defense around as far as being able to get to the quarterback. Because let's face it, Trey Hendrickson, over the last few years, he's arguably been one of the top 5 pass rushers in the National Football League because he's just been that consistent. But also, he fits with the Philadelphia Eagles scheme just because of their front seven in general and how ferocious they can be, and how Vic Fangio just loves to take advantage of like certain situations and how they scheme to certain downs, particularly in pass rush situations. And you add a guy like Trey Hendrickson, regardless of Philly losing Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, they're still full of athletes. I mean, look no further than guys like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Nolan Smith, and they're getting Nakobe Dean back from his injury. I mean, bro, that's like four Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, that's just the depth. Not on well, that's the depth of of our university as far as like what they're bringing up, but that's just the Philadelphia Eagles scouting department. That's Howie Roseman and these guys just recognizing the best fits and the best players to fit their scheme and just knowing how to operate and knowing how to get the job done. So those are 2 very optimistic, ideal spots for Trey Hendrickson. So
If I'm Cincinnati, I trade him because my thing is if
you
I don't have
got
enough,
I agree. I
you
agree.
have to trade him.
Yeah. I think you have to because you have to at this point. If you don't have the money, if you're not going to be able to have that money and you're not going to be tied into them, you have to at least get something. You got to get something for them, whether it's a serviceable player or some draft capital. You honestly, I'm trading him. I'm getting draft capital, and come the NFL draft, if you're going to address that defense and that O line anywhere, if you can't do it in free agency, you're gonna have to do it in the draft. There's pass rushers available. There are going to be linebackers available. There are going to be offensive linemen available. You have to address the front seven. You have to address the O line. You have to address the trenches in this draft because I'm telling you right now, even though that core is locked in, I mean, let's face it. I mean, they're not gonna get younger. I mean, Joe Burrow's what 28, 29 already, and he's been injury prone, and a lot of that is due to having a very, very porous offensive line not being able to protect him to take unnecessary hits. And Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, they are definitely young. They are arguably, I think right now they're probably the best duo in football. I think they're the best duo in football. I think AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith has an argument. I think Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison has an argument, and there are a few other wide receiver duos that has an argument. But I think right now, when you look at their body of work, the fact that Jamar Chase has been in top 3 conversations almost his entire career since he got into the league. When you look at a guy like T. Higgins, who as the number 2 receiver, has 2,000-yard seasons under his belt. So I feel like his resume, more than anything, was what commanded $115 million, in a new contract. Because I feel like the only other number 2 right now who you could say might be on T's level right now is probably Puka Nacua with the Rams. If you want to throw Devontae Smith in there, possibly. But I think T. Higgins is up there as far as the best, as being the best number 2 wide receiver in the game right now. So even though Cincinnati they needed to do this, because I promise you, T. Higgins would have got number 1 money. I think he has the ability to be a number 1 receiver in just about every franchise there is who doesn't already have a number 1. He could come in and immediately push them over, and some of those places with a number 1, he could possibly push them over because he's that talented a wide receiver. But if I'm the Cincinnati Bengals and you're looking at the Trey Hendrickson situation, you gotta get some draft capital for him at this point because you're not gonna be able to sign him. I mean, that's $276 million you just tied up into your number 1 and your number 2 wide receiver. You got to be able. You have to acquire something for Trey Hendrickson at this point. You have to trade him. I mean, you look at a team like Philly, like you said. Philly's always ready to wheel and deal. They are not scared to give away
Oh,
some draft capital. They are never scared
what,
to give away draft
what
capital
if I
to
told
get
you
a
about
win that
Howie
player.
Roseman? What if I
He's never
told you
scared.
about
He's
Howie
never
Roseman?
scared. Yeah, he's the best executive in football. I mean, he's the best executive in football. he is never scared to make a big time deal to give up some draft capital if it means he's bringing in an impact player that could help him contend and possibly win another championship. He would not be scared. And the Washington Commanders with Josh Harris and Irvin Magic Johnson, you think they're seeing the culture that they're starting to cultivate with Washington, a winning culture. They're starting to bring that back with Washington. You don't think a team like that wouldn't be willing to give up a little bit of draft capital to bring in a Trey Hendrickson? You want to talk about a division shattering move possibly? You add Trey
Yeah,
Hendrickson to the Washington Commanders. Y'all, folks just don't understand. A guy like Trey Hendrickson could really shift power in any division, if he joins a team who's like on the cusp of doing something special. Trey Hendrickson could be that type of player for Washington to swing the pendulum from Philly to them going into 2025 to potentially win the NFC East. Because even though Philly's going to be the favorite to win a division, a team is not a lock that they're going to win it again with a team like Washington, especially if they bring in a Trey Hendrickson. But so Cincinnati, they see I feel like they're going to be a bunch of teams coming and calling and knocking at their door to try to acquire Trey Henderson. They have to, if at this point you got to find the best deal possible, you have to bring in the most draft capital you can for a Trey Henderson to address that O line and to address that defense. Because I'm telling you right now, it's not going to do them any good if they're scoring 30 and they're giving up 35. It's not going to do them a bit. It's not going to do them a bit of good. And we've seen that too many times where some of the greatest offenses in the history of the league did not succeed and ultimately win championships because it was always one or multiple things that held them back. And 9 times out of 10, it was usually the defense could not catch up to what the offense was bringing on a weekly basis. We've seen it too many times. Us being in Georgia, we saw it way too many times. Way too many times. I mean, 2016, seventh best scoring offense in league history, and that defense was like bottom, bottom half, like in the 20s, as far as being able to keep, as far as giving up yards and stuff like that. So Cincinnati, if they want to contend and win the AFC North, because Baltimore is not going anywhere. Pittsburgh might be on the fence, but I mean, let's face it, it's still the Pittsburgh Steelers. And say what you want about Mike Tomlin having winning seasons, if Mike Tomlin's there, they're gonna be around. They're going to be around. They need to do something to shore up the front seven and O line to have a chance to win the AFC North because that is a division winning offense, but that is a top 5 draft pick defense. They need to do something to address that pronto.
I would love to see Trey Hendrickson with Washington, considering the fact that we lost Dante Fowler Jr. and we needed depth on that D line position. Because I've told Champ before, we moved on from Chase Young, Montez Sweat, and Jonathan Allen. I had no problem moving on with Chase Young and Jonathan Allen. I was more upset losing Montez, Champ. I told you about Montez,
yes, you
but
did.
but Trey Hendrickson, if we're Washington, you saw the year that we had coming off the NFC Championship game. Now, I don't see Washington having the type of season that they had last year, Champ, because again, no expectations. There's going to be expectations. Washington could win the division because if you look at Philadelphia this offseason, a lot of key departures. Darius Slade gone, Josh Sweat gone. And look, Philly's moving in a direction. They're looking to a younger direction. They might do something in the draft. We'll never know. With Howie Roseman there, you never know. But if you're Washington, I gotta admit, you've had a really good offseason. I mean, you did pick up Laramie Tunsil, so now you added depth to the O-line, Champ. Sam Cosmi is coming back. If you're Washington, you need a pass rusher. I mean, you need somebody. I mean, it can't just be Deron Payne. It's got to be somebody else who can get after the quarterback. And plus, we also have to stop the run. Like I said before, Washington was 30th in the NFL in stopping the run. I think with Trey Hendrickson, and plus, he has played in the Super Bowl. So he has playoff experience, and he can actually help out Washington. And Washington is all about building a culture.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? This actually may be a good year for Washington to win the division because you look at the Cowboys heading with free agency. I don't think they did that bad though, but it wasn't enough. And when you look at the Eagles, they lost some pieces, and again, they're moving to a different direction. If you're Washington, you might as grab it and capitalize it as much as you can. But if you're Trey Hendrickson, you want to go to a team that's a championship contender, whether the Eagles, Commanders, or whoever it may be. I would love to see him in Washington.